Okay, I think we're going to get started. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
My name is John Traylor. I'm the Chief Procurement Officer for the Office of General Services, and as one of my new duties since taking that position in May, I'm the new chair of the New York State Procurement Council. So welcome, everybody. I certainly hope to get to know all the board members, some of whom are friendly faces, over the years ahead. Obviously, we want to continue to make the Procurement Council an effective voice on procurement policy for New York State. I did want to take a minute to thank Ann Phillips for her service as chair of the group for several years now. I apologize. I had a letter actually to read from the commissioner. I must have left it in my office in the hurry to get down here today. But basically, Ann has provided not only wisdom and guidance on legal matters, but also policy matters, was key, obviously, in steering a number of changes, beginning with the Procurement Stewardship Act, through the legislature. We certainly appreciate that she's not going away anywhere. She will be right here to continue to provide me sage wisdom and guidance, but I just wanted to again take a minute to thank her for all her service. So Ann, thank you. We have a couple of new members that I wanted to acknowledge. Jim Bays, who's the first Deputy Commissioner, is our designee from the Department of Agriculture and Markets. Jim joins us as a relatively new member to state service, but comes with lots of experience. Obviously, the folks at Ag and Markets are thrilled to have him out there, as are we, to, again, provide some guidance to us, particularly on issues as they relate to healthy food initiatives, by New York, and a number of the other procurement issues that intersect with Ag and Markets. So welcome, Jim. We also have Andy Bouchard here, I believe, from the Office of Information Technology Services. Andy is stepping in as the new designee for ITS. Mary McGinty, who is now a member of my staff, formerly held that position. So Andy, welcome. We appreciate it. Obviously, IT being the largest category of procurement goods and services that we have in New York State, we appreciate your membership here on the board. First order of business today is really approval of our draft minutes from the February meeting. Folks received that at the posting on our website in advance of the meeting. Just wanted to make sure there weren't any additions or corrections needed for the minutes. Seeing none, I just need a motion to approve. So moved. Second? All in favor? Great. Minutes are approved. Thank you very much. First item on the agenda is really to allow me a few minutes to talk a little bit more about what's going on at the Office of General Services in terms of procurement transformation. As I mentioned, I was asked to come over and take the position of Chief Procurement Officer in May of this year as part of a enterprise-wide initiative by Governor Cuomo to really start to transform some of what we call our back office or administrative operations in New York State, procurement, information technology, real estate, fleet, a number of areas that our state agencies are certainly in the middle of right now. And was asked to come over to serve as Chief Procurement Officer to head up that procurement transformation effort. We are in the middle of working very hard to start to reorganize OGS operations in procurement, including the creation of a dedicated team to work with our authorized users, specifically local governments and nonprofits, who are a significant portion of our spending against many of the centralized contracts that we put into place. Don Green and Bruce Hallenbach. Don is here today. Bruce, I think, is in the audience, are going to be part of my leadership team, specifically heading up that unit. And we obviously look forward to working with local governments and other authorized users to improve the way in which we can put contracts in place, not only to save them money, because they're under the same fiscal pressures that our state agencies are, but also to put contracts in place that are easier for them to use administratively. We're also creating dedicated groups, obviously, to continue our strategic sourcing effort, something we launched about a year ago, really applying data-driven analytical techniques to the way in which we develop strategies to procure centralized contracts. That group is forming up as we speak. We were fortunate enough to have the governor and the Division of the Budget provide us with some additional resources to get that group off the ground, and we're working through the Office of Civil Service and DOB to move forward with adding some staffing in that area. We're also going to continue to provide what I like to call in-house consulting services to agencies who have specific agency procurements but may need some guidance or assistance with developing terms and conditions or market research and things like that. In fact, we've been working with Jim and Ag and Markets on some specific areas in that space over the summer. So we're trying to do a lot of things organizationally to align our business and our resources more closely with the direction that the governor's office wants to go, but also where we see our customers needing assistance. And our focus is really going to be on saving money, improving the contracting efficiency cycle to try and get contracts in place quicker than we do now, and improving our customer service. We know this is going to be a multi-year effort. But we're obviously very anxious to work with the Procurement Council and all of the leadership that it provides, as well as our state agency partners, to get that done in the months ahead. So I just wanted to give people an update on that. We will probably try and come at some point and do a more formal presentation once staffing plans are in place, so we can start to have all of the membership here associate names and faces with the new leadership positions that we're putting in place at OGS. I want to move on now to have Ann pick up several items that came out of the 2012 legislative session. There was a packet included again with the Procurement Council information that summarized a lot of those legislative changes. They were fairly numerous this year. She's also going to talk about a specific legislative change related to the Iran Divestment Act. Ann?
Good morning, and just know I'm not going to go through each and every one of these because that would just be dreadful for all of you, and we don't want to do that. Couple of things to highlight. The procurement stewardship was scheduled to sunset again. We got another extension for 4 years. So we're still in business, and that's always good. We got it early because we had an on-time budget, so there was no nail biting, which I've done on prior occasions when we got really, really close to expiring. Two things of which I've been pursuing for a long time on behalf of OGS and for state procurement. When the Procurement Stewardship Act was passed, there was a dividing line between commodities and services. And with respect to that, centralized contracts for commodities for authorized users, the list of who could buy from those contracts was different for commodities and for services. And since 1995, I've been trying to get that list made the same so that all authorized users could purchase from centralized contracts for commodities and for centralized contracts for services. We have achieved that this year in this year's budget, and we no longer will have to do the workarounds that we had to do in our services contracts to make them available to the entire list of authorized users. So that was very gratifying and long overdue in my mind. The other thing that we managed to do this year was to bring the procurement of printing into the 21st century. It was firmly stuck in the 19th. It was situated in the Printing and Public Documents Law. It related to printing as it was performed in the early part of the 20th century. It really needed to be brought up to date, and we have basically essentially made it the functional equivalent of purchasing commodities. So printing will continue to be done based on a low price, and but it is now subject to the same kind of statutory provisions that are set forth for the procurement of commodities. So those two things were a long time coming, but very gratifying to be able to achieve them during this particular session. If anybody has questions about any of the other changes, some things are going to require some implementation measures, and we're still working on those. So they are work in progress, and different minds have different viewpoints about how that implementation should take place. But I would think we might have some more information by the next Procurement Council meeting. Moving on to the Iran Divestment Act, you all have a list in your packet of businesses that are determined to be non-responsive bidders or offerers going forward in time. The legislature early in the session passed a piece of legislation that asked the Office of General Services to develop a list of firms that were in the energy sector who were dealing with Iran. If you were found to be in that category, you are put on this list, and state agencies, public authorities, SUNY, CUNY, and local governments are precluded from awarding contracts to these. One fortunate happenstance is that none of the firms that are listed on the list that we put together currently holds a state contract. We're hopeful that in many instances we won't have to encounter the possibility of doing business with these, because many of them are foreign banks, which are not typical contractors for the state of New York. This particular legislation follows some actions by both the federal government, and the state of California. New Jersey has just also passed similar legislation, and we're in the nice position of being able to help them as they go through the same process we did to develop this list. Just wanted you guys to be aware of it, and if there are any questions, you can contact me. We now have an attorney who is well-versed in my office with all aspects of this particular piece of legislation.
Thank you, Ann. I'm going to turn the next agenda item over to Don Green, one of my directors. He's going to start with a piece of good news. In this business, typically, no news is good news. It's rare we get compliments. Usually all we hear about are complaints. But we did want to pass on a nice compliment from the state of Nebraska that we received over the summer regarding our statewide procurement guidelines that are out on the web. Obviously, as Ann mentioned, one of the things we've got to do coming out of the legislative changes is update some of those guidelines as well as the regs. But they were looking for a model to use for their own state, and they really liked what they saw with New York. So, Don?
Sure. Okay. Good morning. As John said, Nebraska was searching the web. We often have inquiries from other states through our association and affiliation with the NASPO group. Nebraska reached out to us, and for the members, the email is in the packet. We shared with them the good work that came out of the council. The two main writers of that are here today, Nancy Fisher and Monica Wilkes, I think, is one of our past directors, assistant directors. They were the main writers of that document, so I want to acknowledge the good work they did. Many states are struggling with, how to put these kinds of regulations and guidelines together. I think we did a great job there, and as John said, we need to make some additional changes to that, and we will be doing that over a period of time. We have an entire contract management group, and we'll be working with them to update those changes and bring it before the council just so that they know we're making those changes. Okay? That's the first one. The next thing that I normally do at this is to kind of give an update of those changes in applications that we have approved under our delegated authority. that the council has provided us. Also in the packet is a list of those updates that we approved since February. We actually approved 3 applications since then, all under $50,000 for a total amount of, excuse me, I'm having a hard time reading this. My wife keeps telling me I need glasses. No, I don't believe her. I figured hair loss is enough for me. The number of FTEs, disabled FTEs, turned out to be about a little over 1.2 FTEs, and for a total amount, estimated amount of $137,000, approximately $137,000. A couple of them are for trainers for the shoe training applications for the Department of Corrections and shock incarceration folks, and then also a jacket for the normally used by road crews. Okay, so that's that. We have a number of applications that we're continue to review, and as we move forward, next time we have I'll report again. Okay, I'm going to turn it back over to Michael Hurt.
Great. Folks may recall at the November 2011 meeting, the council had created a preferred source subcommittee to address an issue raised by Empire State Development with respect to the meaning of value added as it related to preferred source offerings. Committee worked all through the first half of 2012 to modify that guidance, as well as some other updates that it discovered as it went through that process. Michael Hurt from the Division of Industries at Department of Correctional Services is going to give us an update of those guidelines as they've been submitted to the council for review.
Thanks, John. I was asked to use the podium. I can certainly do this from here.
Up to you. What do you prefer?
Well, my back would be to the audience there. Is there a preference to the audience if you see my back or my front? I didn't think so. Why don't I just do it from here, and we'll keep it simple for everybody. Thank you. And unlike Don, I listen to my wife, so I have my glasses, and I will be using them frequently. So, first of all, a quick thanks to all of the staff at OGS that worked with the preferred source subcommittee. As John said, we've had several meetings to address concerns that were brought up in November of last year by Steve Cohen at ESD, requesting clarification and guidance on the meaning of added value as it relates to the preferred source offerings. At that time, the council did approve the creation of a subcommittee to address this issue. And again, I want to say thanks to the staff on behalf of the subcommittee. Put a lot of time and effort into reviewing this information and coming forward with some recommendations. I'll also share with you that our work is not finished. There were some additional edits and some changes that we were making as late as a week or two ago. So I'm not asking the council at this particular time to approve the recommendations that are going to be coming forward, but I did certainly want to give you a highlighted overview of where we are, some of the key changes that we've looked at, and make some recommendations going forward. And I'm hoping at our next meeting we'll be able to have a final document for you to review and to approve. As I said, the committee did successfully work on the definition of added value. It was discovered also during this process that the guidelines for adding a new commodity or service also needed some work. So we also took on that task at no extra charge to the taxpayers of New York, I'll say. Those guidelines had never been properly publicly posted or updated, and therefore we felt that we really needed to work on that also. We worked pretty hard, and we were successful, I believe, in looking at the guidelines and working through some of the language changes that needed to be done. It was also determined that rather than have the document itself, which was a standalone document, it should really be incorporated into the New York State Procurement Bulletin and the Preferred Source Guidelines overall. So we're going to be recommending that also take place as the language changes are incorporated. Let me just highlight some of the things that we looked at. We talked about and looked at removing dates and references in the document that were no longer applicable, such as the reference to OGS creating the preferred source lists. We also looked at the detailing of the delegation of authority of the council to OGS to approve addition of new and substantially different commodities which had a value of less than $500,000 annually. We did make some text more friendly, user-friendly, and provided some additional details. We did some wordsmithing to kind of clean up the language that we felt was outdated and no longer reflected what really should be in the current documents. And we added some reference information to facilitating agencies when it is the facilitating agency rather than the actual preferred source that was involved in the task or the duty at hand. And there was also some updated and referencing that we needed to do to reflect the changes in the 2012 state finance law, which required agencies to use OGS services and technology contracts before utilizing other agency contract or conducting their own procurement. Let me just highlight a little bit about the definitions of value added. We felt that in our review that the definition of added value meant that the commodity or product had to, A, undergo a change in physical state which enhances its value, or been altered or processed in a manner which increases its value and provides a customer with benefits that appeal to his or her immediate needs, and is not simply a pass-through from the private sector without meaning participation by the incarcerated or disabled. And again, I know you might be saying, well, gee, wasn't that in there before? The language was vague. It wasn't clear. And again, the inquiry from Mr. Cohen led us to take a closer look at that and clean up that language. We also clarified where ESD was involved in the process with regards to reviewing applications for new offerings. And we added references for the need to identify corporate partners which preferred sources use on certain services and contracts. So I know that was a little fast and a kind of a high level. Again, it's a work in progress, and if anyone has any questions, I'll be glad to defer them to some of the people on the committee.
Office of Mental Health, we have a number of contracts with preferred sources that utilize subcontractors or partners to provide the service. One of the things that we're looking at is being able to, where possible, if those are MWBE firms, getting that effort to be able to help with our MWBE requirements. I recognize that preferred sources are excluded initially, but our challenge is if they are using an MWBE firm, we'd like to get the benefit of having that. Is that something that could be addressed in this or discussed?
I think that's a really good question. You know, as the committee did its work, we didn't address MWBE as part of the language change that we were looking at. If it's something that you'd like us to take a look at, I think the committee is going to schedule another meeting. We can certainly have that discussion. I'm not sure that how we would do it or the methodology, but it's something we can certainly discuss.
Thank you.
Ron?
Yes, Ron Romano from NYSED. I believe there is some mention of that in the legislation or the information that was promulgated at the end of last year by the, 2 years ago, actually, I think, by Governor Patterson, when there was some new information and regulations for MWBs, and I think it recognizes if there's a MWBE partner on a preferred source contract, that the individual agency can use that as part of its goal recognition. I believe I'll try to find that, but I believe it has been addressed to that effect, and we typically try to partner. That's one of our criteria when we're selecting partners is to try to partner with certified minority and women-owned businesses. So.
Yeah, I think it's certainly something that we can take a look at, both through the, a discrete identification if there is an MWB subcontractor involved during the application process, right? As well as making sure that if the council would put guidance out, it would be consistent with a governor's executive order. I know that governs a lot of the MWBE. And I think we could obviously talk to the chief diversity officer, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, to get a little bit more information with respect to that. But I do think it's a good suggestion to be able to clearly flag that as an assistance to our agencies. Any other questions then?
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. Again, the plan is to have the final version of that distributed in advance of our November meeting, so we can take formal action and adoption of the subcommittee's work. And obviously, thanks to all who worked on this. We appreciate your efforts over the last several months. All right, we want to move to really the main presentation today, which is a update on the statewide financial system, which went live in April of 2012 this year after a multi-year effort. That really brings up for the first time a statewide enterprise financial system that provides end-to-end functionality for our agencies. There is significant both contract and purchasing changes that resulted in that, as well as requirements on anyone doing business with the state of New York. So we thought it would be appropriate and timely to get an update on progress that SFS is making, highlight some of those changes and intersection points. So Allison Pengelski from SFS is here to make a presentation. Greg Zink, who's the acting director out there, unfortunately had a scheduling conflict this morning and wasn't able to get down here in time, although we may see him running through the doors if he gets done with his meeting soon enough. But we'll have Allison move through the presentation and then have time for some questions. Allison?
So good morning, everyone. I'm Allison Pengelski. I am the enterprise architect for SFS. Since I started with SFS, I've had a number of titles. I've worked kind of throughout the SFS organization. And my responsibility now as the enterprise architect is to really look at the stakeholders' needs that are not being filled or filled the way they anticipated them to be filled with SFS, and to try to develop strategic solutions that optimizes what the SFS application has to offer, and yet fills their business needs as well. So with my new title, Enterprise Architect, I'm still doing some of the same problem-solving activities that I was doing before. So I just have a new title to go along with those responsibilities. So SFS went live. Does everyone know what SFS is? I'm assuming Greg assumed that you did, so I'll assume that you do as well. So SFS is the new statewide financial system, and we launched in April, and I'm personally very proud of what we've accomplished since then, although we've had our fair share of challenges. So I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that it wasn't easy, and it continues to be challenging. So we have a couple highlights that we wanted to talk about today, and then we'll open it up to questions. The content is the overall system launch, kind of some business process information, and then we'll go into what we thought was some highlights of some efficiencies from purchasing staff. I will caveat that with it all depends on how they choose to use it, how they're gaining those efficiencies. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So the SFS launch process. It's very hard to show the difference between the central accounting system and the FMS and where we are with SFS today. So we have a couple different slides that we're hoping will represent that, but again, it's kind of flat, so it doesn't really show you how dynamic things really are. We went from a single start and stop perspective to a 24/7 operation. And with that came a series of modules. So there's different navigation to do specific transaction, and with that navigation comes certain system processes. So what this graphic is intended to represent to you is the agencies are going in and they've identified key users that are associated with specific business processes, and they enter transactions into that module. So we'll take purchasing, for example. A user would be given access to purchasing. There are other individuals in the organization that would be approving those transactions the same way you had before. And then the system does a lot of other things once that button is saved. So with the introduction of SFS came ledgers. And that's a new concept because there wasn't truly ledgers in CAS or in some of the other FMS systems that were being used. So with the ledger concept comes some less clear start and stop positions for a transaction. So what I tried to represent in the top of the graphic is really where those start and stop critical activities happen. And I think that there's three key areas. The budget check, that tells you that your transaction is cleared budget and it's on its way to posting. In some cases, budget check happens before approval, so the transaction could come back to you and need to be re-budget checked. So there's kind of an iterative process there. Once it is free and clear of budget checking and approvals, it then posts. So again, you go from one ledger which says, I'm reducing the amount of budget that I have available. Now I'm actually showing that that transaction has been accounted for in the system and it's been posted. And then the pay cycle process, when the check's actually going out the door, is what shows the reduction in cash or the disbursement. And those words are a little bit different in SFS than they were in CAS. And I talked to a lot of the agency end users, and we talk a lot about the fact that you could count 2 days from when the expenditure hit to when the disbursement hit. And in SFS, it's much different. That 2-day time frame from expenditure to disbursement will vary depending on the approval process and the posting process and your cash available. So that's a little bit different from where you were in the CAS environment. GL, in the purest sense, was handled outside of SFS through a different legacy system in the controller's office. That's now part of SFS, and so I have that in the diagram slightly different because GL is both a module and a ledger, and that gets terribly confusing for some of our users when we show that in some of our slides. So I tried to show that in this picture by showing you that it is a module, but general ledger is also part of where the modified accrual ledger, which is where the transaction is posted, and the cash ledger, which is where the disbursement is reflected. So you can see by this picture there's a lot of things going on, and unfortunately it's very flat. I should have some kind of globe or cube that would actually help us to better see the dimensions of it. So we were trying to figure out how to represent all of the interested parties, and I feel like I'm that center yellow circle there. It's meant to reflect sunshine. Sometimes I don't exactly feel like that's a good position that I'm in some days because of the competing stakeholder priorities. And everyone wants to solve their business problem. And while I do have a twin sister, she's not an exact clone, so there's sometimes not enough of me to go around during the day. But what we hope to illustrate here is that we are trying to balance what's good for the enterprise and solve business needs. And sometimes that doesn't necessarily come out to be the exact solution that the stakeholders are looking for. So there's a lot of give and take, there's a lot of compromise, and we're still working. It's still a work in progress. I would not say that we're finished by any means. We still have more modules to offer, we still have more functionality that we want to deliver to the state. So all of that's a factor in what we're offering. Does anybody have any questions about any of these slides before we move on? I don't want to go too fast. I want to give you an opportunity to ask if you have them. Okay. So since we launched, we have some good indication that we're not doing so badly. When I look at the defect in the incident volume from the help desk, sometimes I feel like I'm not sure how we're making payments every day, but we are, and we're doing them. From an enterprise perspective, we're doing very well. And so we put some statistics in here for you to reflect the actual payments that we've made. So as of September 24th, when we sent this deck over, there was $52,193,320,115 worth of payments. So I think that there's something to be said about that volume. We've also hit some critical milestones. We've had, well, we're approaching our third, but we've had 2 lapsing periods. And for those of you that know what lapsing is, that's when you need to hurry up and spend down your budget before it goes away. And that presented more challenges than we expected. And we've had some other critical milestones along with that that has made us pause and consider some of the design ideas that we had and how we were implementing those and rethink some of those concepts. So I think it's still a work in progress on some of those things as well. Some of the other things that we're doing, we are working with agencies on user groups. We're trying to bring the module users together to talk about how they're using the modules so that they can leverage best practices from each other. And we can try to reach that end user where we don't seem to be able to get down to that person that's sitting at the keyboard who's experiencing the challenges. The user group concept is to get them to come to SFS to tell us about what their challenges are and to help them resolve problems. I felt fairly satisfied this week. We were able to shut 3 things down using this venue that the user was thinking the system had to be fixed because it was broken, and in fact they were using it wrong. And so in pretty quick time we were able to demonstrate how what they were doing was not necessarily what they should be intending to do, and we were able to resolve some of those things, which for their perspective was creating hours of extra work. So I feel that through this user group venue, and as we continue to bring some of these things forward, we'll start to identify and resolve some of these things, and hopefully that will start to bridge the relationship with our stakeholders as well. We just reorganized at SFS. We too have gone through some changes as well. And one of the things that we've done is we've changed our focus. We've actually changed from a deployment perspective to an actual operational organization. We're no longer a project, we're an agency as well. So we're starting to operationalize ourselves at SFS. So in that, we have created a customer advocacy group, and that group is a tiered approach. It encompasses the help desk. It also encompasses that person you become familiar with, and you know their number by heart, and you call them and you tell them your problem, and they tell you what the solution is. So the customer advocacy team that encompasses the help desk approach is designed to give you that phone number to call and that person to listen to your woes and to try to point you and steer you in the right direction. They're also doing escalation, where they are getting those multiple calls about the same concept. They're escalating to some of the subject matter experts and then to the enterprise architect team for problem resolution. So instead of just having help desk incidents come in and working just in priority, we're also working them from a tiered perspective. The ones that the lower level staff that are not necessarily the subject matter experts but are generalists can answer, they're answering those, and the subject matter experts are answering the more complex questions. Just getting started. Some days I feel like I'm not sure if there's a start and a stop, but Go Live, I guess, was the start of our new adventure. I think that we could do some things to improve, and we are looking at where we are with incidents and defects, and we're trying to ensure that we are stabilizing the system. We want the system to be reliable. We want you to have confidence in the system and the data within the system, and that's coming a couple different ways. We want to solve the defects so that you know that the system is working correctly. We also want to educate users so that they understand how the data is going in the system, getting processed, and how they're getting information back out. Because things are very different from the way it was in CAS. And with a 24/7 operation and constant processing, you're never sure that you're getting the same information. It's not a start and stop as it was with CAS. So at some point, information is coming in on a regular basis. You're not necessarily always going to have that drop dead date where you can stick the flag in the ground and say, this is the same as it was 2 hours ago. You don't necessarily have that same concept in SFS. So we are striving to be sure that the reports and the data within the reports that we're providing are consistent and reliable. And with that is some challenges. The liability date concept, for those of you that have been participating in our user group for liability date, has caused some inconsistency in expenditure data in reports. So the system is doing what it's designed to do. What is not happening is you're not getting the results you expect because of the use of liability date in the accounting date field. So SFS is aware of that. We've been communicating that to the end users and as wide of an audience as we can, that the reports aren't changing because the system's not reliable. The reports are changing because the data is coming in and the data is affecting how it's represented in the report. So again, education, correcting the defects, and some of those other critical things will help us to get to a stable system that you know you can rely on and depend on, and you're confident in the data that it produces. Some of the benefits of conducting business in SFS. Now, I see some of my frequent flyers in the audience, so I will say that they may jump up and challenge some of the things that I'm about to say. So I will say out of the gate that sometimes it's as good as the information that you put into the system. So there's a lot of complexity with SFS that wasn't necessarily layered into CAS. Security and workflow is one of those critical things that if you set it up right, you reap the rewards from it. If you set it up wrong, you are frustrated with how long it takes to get information through the system. So with that, I will say that some of the benefits of SFS is that you are able to see where everything is at any point in time. And I think that that was difficult if you envision SFS. Now, for those of you that don't know how old I am, I'm not as old as it'll sound like when I say I started at the controller's office when they were pushing paper vouchers around in the Alfred E. Smith building. So that wasn't that long ago. But if you think about that concept, paper vouchers being pushed around in a shopping cart, you had no idea which shopping cart your voucher was in. At this point, you know exactly what shopping cart your voucher's in because SFS tells you that. So I think from that, we've made some giant leaps forward. Now, sometimes you can't get that voucher out of that shopping cart because of the way your security or the way your workflow is designed. And we get a lot of requests about that, and it's terribly challenging because when agencies were allowed to pick from a menu of 10 options, they picked 10 options. And they didn't understand or appreciate the consequences. And I don't know that we did the best job in educating the end user on making those right selections. So when we offered the Chinese menu, we didn't say, you want to pick 1, 3, and 5. We said, here's 10 choices. How does that look? And they said, ooh, 10 choices. I only had one choice. I get 10 choices now. I want all 10 choices. And so what we're finding is as agencies start to see how the transactions are getting stuck in the system, they're starting to go back and say, well, wait, I took 1 through 10, but what did I really want to have if this was my end result? So now they're getting to the 1, 3, and 5 choices as opposed to 1 through 10. So again, I think that the benefits are there. It's all in how we're using them and how we've implemented them. I think that security is another critical component. When we first rolled out security, we were discussing security through an Excel spreadsheet. And that was terribly confusing, even for those of us who were trying to communicate to the end user what the security was supposed to be by using an Excel spreadsheet that went out to something like BX, I believe. So when you had to pick from A to BX, sometimes you pick things that in real life you would know would be an internal control weakness. So trying to find the right balance of internal controls and the right security access in SFS has proven to be challenged. Also layering workflow on top of that so that you don't have everything going to one person and creating 100 shopping cart items for them has also been a challenge. So I think that as we work through some of these solutions and we change security and we change workflow for agencies, you'll start to see an improved efficiency in the way and how quickly you're able to get transactions through the system. I don't think we're doing that badly. And I put this slide in because I've actually been looking at these performance metrics to see if there's any indicators where we might do some areas for improvement. I quite honestly don't think it's so bad that it's taking 8 days from inception to payment in the system. Would anyone disagree? What do you want it to be?
Less than 8 days.
Less than 8? 7?
I would appreciate less than 30 days. We've got some payments that are older than that in the system that are not being processed.
Okay. So this is the state average. So I do want to address the fact that, to Michael's point, not everything is going in 8 days. But the fact that as an enterprise we're averaging 8 days, I think that that's a pretty good metric for us to start to compare to. Some of the challenges to see how good or how bad we're doing is that there were a number of different legacy systems that consolidated into SFS. I have no idea how long it took any single agency from inception to payment because I don't know how long it took them in their legacy system. I only can compare it to the CAS data. So right now we're looking from a voucher processing perspective. There's 3 different tiers here. Do they have the handout, Ann? Okay. This presentation will be on the website, so you'll be able to see the shading and the grid. But we gave you from the agency origin to the approval process, and we actually showed the OSC timeframe for payments. So that has stayed very consistent. OSC was turning out your payments in 2 days. They continue to do it in less than 2 days. So I think from that aspect, we've stayed right on target there. I added this graphic because I was trying to show a visual of the start and stop perspective from CAS as opposed to SFS. So I hope that this graphic represents that for you, and it's a good takeaway to kind of understand. With CAS, you knew you had a window of opportunity to get transactions in. At some point, that window of opportunity stopped, and processing started, and you got your reports. And then it started all over the very next day the same way. In SFS, processing is happening all day long. When end users are in the system and budget checking runs, which is scheduled every 2 hours, you're seeing the effect of those transactions. There's no start and stop because I don't know what time you're starting to enter transactions. Some users come in at 7, some users come in at 8. So we're running processes all day long. Now, we too have a batch process that kind of aggregates data and we run the pay cycle process. So there is a stop from that aspect in that whatever is in the system as of that point gets paid and we start the process again. However, you could continue to enter transactions while we're doing that batch processing. There's nothing that would preclude you from doing that. So I think that this graphic we put in here to hopefully illustrate that contrast for you. So some of the purchasing staff, I think we talked a little bit about this. Recs, POs, vouchers, they're all in the system. There's an ability to copy, so once you enter, it's not like before where you had to get out the typewriter, type the rec, then type the PO, then get into the voucher or collect all those pieces of paper. It's all in the system, and you can link all of the documents together. And the beauty of it is that you can actually see how they're related because you click the related documents link. And it actually shows you how your voucher links to your PO and how your PO links to your rec. So that's one of the benefits of SFS from a pure purchasing perspective. Long live the plot sheets for credit cards. For those of you that have ever had to fill out a procurement card plot sheet to reconcile your charges to your statement, we are now doing that inside of SFS. I will say that that is not without its own challenges. The delivered process is dependent on you paying your bill and then doing your reconciliation. Well, we're loading the charges every single day. So those agencies that have very astute procurement card holders, as soon as they make a charge and they see it come in, they're doing the reconciliation. So at one point, we were running the process to clear those reconciled items every night, and it accidentally was creating some vouchers to Citibank. So there were some reconciling items that had to be cleared up. And I don't know that the process is fine-tuned. I know that the car starts and the lights aren't on the dashboard anymore. So I would say that at least we're making progress from that aspect. Is there anything else that's on this slide that you want more information on? We put a lot of stuff out there, and I don't want to bore you to death. Okay, so with that, I know Michael has questions. So do you want to go first?
Why not? First of all, I think that the SFS implementation was massive, and kudos to you and to the SFS team. A lot of work. I know there was some false starts a number of times. We thought we were going to kick it off, and it didn't. And it's finally up and running, and we're pleased to see that. And also your acknowledgement that it is a work in progress. It's a long way from complete. And one more statement before I begin is that understanding that what we do and where we sit within the SFS universe is unique as from other state agencies, because we have a lot of transactions, accounts payable, accounts receivable. We're in a, quote, business module, so the number of transactions probably exceeds tenfold what you would see normally within your daily process. I think one of our biggest challenges right now is that in the transition from the implementation and startup of SFS to the actual operation of it now, we've seen a precipitous drop-off in user support and responsiveness from SFS on the issues and concerns and problems that we're still having. Some are minor, having to do with the flow charts and system access, to major ones where we are now waiting over 30 days for payment of bills because no one in SFS can tell us what happened to the budget information that was processed. And we're not getting a response back from staff to resolve these issues. For other agencies, it may be a single invoice that's 30 days old. For us, you're talking, hundreds of thousands of dollars that small businesses and vendors in New York State are not receiving payment. And so we'd really like to see, a more responsive support staff, certainly to our simple inquiries. The escalation process that you noted on there, it's really not working well for us. There is no escalation. We're not getting the return calls that we need. Another critical thing that we're dealing with right now is we, in our, quote, business module, we do a lot of financial review and audits. We have our auditors in right now. We're unable to pull the type of reporting information out in order to satisfy the accountants that are working on our finances right now so that we can track where we are. I looked at a report just last week that showed a payment deficit of an extreme amount. I won't give a dollar amount. Having to go back to my superiors and justify why we're not paying bills on time or why the income isn't coming in, the simple answer is the system's not working. We're unable to track that information and really be able to provide to senior leadership where we are from a financial perspective. And finally, I think other state agencies may be facing what we're facing when the separation of duties and work charts and flow charts were set up initially. You had to have 2 or 3 people be responsible or involved for checks and balances and being authorized to make payments and or processes move forward. Unfortunately, we no longer have the staff. Our staff has been cut significantly, and we only have one person that handles the responsibility of 3 different people. So we find that to be challenging too, and we have to kind of work around it, if you will, in order to make things flow through the system. So I know I talked a little bit here, but those are all things that I think hopefully will be addressed, but most importantly, simply having your support staff be responsive to our inquiries. Yes, we know how to use the system, we do know how to make inquiries, but they're not being responded to.
So I'll address that in a couple of different ways. One of the slides actually talks to, in addition to the user groups, We have a daily agency call where agencies are able to escalate situations like yours with a group of subject matter experts that are participating in the call. So afterwards, if you want to provide me some specific details, I can take that back with me and we can see if we can get you some resolution. I think that it's just as challenging inside of SFS because we're transitioning from a project perspective to operations, and with that comes education. And so with the decrease in system integrator support, we're really relying on the knowledge within the state team at SFS. So unfortunately, some answers take longer than they should because we too need to help you figure out what the problem is. I'm not suggesting that that should be the norm. That should be the exception because of the complexity of a transaction. Standard transactions, you should get an immediate response to. So if you feel that you're not getting that, I would absolutely suggest that you reach out to Greg and we can take some information after the session because we would want to be aware of those and we'd want to be working with you to try to get you to the resolution because we believe in the system, and if it's not working for you, it's probably not working for the enterprise, and we need to resolve those items. So I think that we're very serious in our customer service approach, and we do want to try to get you better response time. So we'll take some of that information back, and we'll try to resolve it. As far as approvals, I did skip that bullet, but I will go back to this slide. One of the flexibilities with SFS is pooled roles. So with that, I mean that the two of us could have the exact same responsibilities, and we get a common shopping cart. So we could each take turns taking the first thing off the basket, and we'll work that basket much quicker, and you can add more people to that pool so that they too can reduce the volume in the shopping cart. So I think that there's some flexibility that doesn't necessarily cause you an internal control weakness as far as separation of duties, but also allows you to remedy some of those decreased in staff. So we would want to probably evaluate where you are from a security profile. And again, I go back to, we offered a Chinese menu of 1 through 10, and when you picked 1 through 10, we didn't necessarily know at the time what that meant for you. We thought it was a great idea that we were giving you options, where now we're going back and we're reevaluating best practice and industry standards and really what's making sense for the enterprise. So I think that from those lessons learned, we could possibly offer you a different security profile, which will help you get to this a better, effective, pooled resource approval, I think.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes. Nancy, right?
Yes, Nancy Fisher. I'm with the New York State Department of Economic Development, and I had the experience of entering travel and expenses and so on. It was very interesting. It wasn't difficult to use. I mean, there was a logic to it and so on. But one of the things that happened to me that I understand is happening to users across the system is that they're timed out even though they're working in the module, working on the system. And I just wondered if there's a examination of this and what is happening that would cause active use to still be looked at by the system as a timeout.
So there's a trick, and then there's some bad news. So I'll tell you the trick first, and then I'll tell you the bad news. The trick is that the way SFS is being delivered, it's being delivered through the web application. So you don't want to leave that open because that leaves SFS vulnerable. So the timeout is part of a system standard, so you will get that message. However, you can minimize that timeout message once you navigate into financials. So when you're doing your expense report, if you have your expense report open, you can close the first window that opens that gives you the two choices what to pick, and that should reduce the amount of timeout. Ideally, you shouldn't time out for 20 minutes, but we do know that sometimes it perceives that you're idle if you're not actually entering information in the screen. So I would suggest that as a tip and trick, and unfortunately, I'm just as frustrated as you are, and I have to be in the system all day long. So I know how frustrating it can be, and I know that the first tip has proven to render me less signed out.
That tip was passed on to me, and I did try that. And it's not so much that it was frustrating for me, but it's feedback that I'm getting from purchasing people I talk to who have to use the system all day long, that they're constantly trying to figure out how to keep from having the system shut down and shut them out and lose their work.
They have, unfortunately, it's triggered by the activity or the perceived activity by the system.
I kind of thought it's which data fields are being worked on and what kind of information is being inserted. Yeah.
Agreed. So sometimes if they're doing an inquiry is different than actually having an open transaction. And so they may perceive that they're in the system doing something that would not render them to be timed out, when indeed the inquiry doesn't necessarily prevent that from happening.
Well, hopefully it'll be improved.
That's core PeopleSoft, unfortunately, so there's probably a cost associated with that. Everything costs money these days, Nancy.
Some things are worth the price.
Agreed. Any other questions? Dave, you ask questions every day.
No, I've been pretty good lately. Some of the challenges we're facing at Office of Mental Health, go to a number of different things. One of the things that we're dealing with is the processing of the actual system time itself. I've had to extend our work days earlier in the day and later in the day in order to get our work done. The system seems to be very slow response time, and it's causing us, and hopefully this won't be a long-term thing that I have to do, but this is something that we've had to do in order to get our transaction through. Plus, you had mentioned that the procurement card or credit card transactions are a lot easier. They seem to take more time for us to get from beginning to end because there's a lot more steps. So, where it's nice that everything's in the system, the amount of steps that we have to go through to get a procurement card transaction from beginning to end is actually longer than it was in CAS. And, you mentioned about reports. It's very frustrating that the reports are out there and either don't work or don't run. And then one of the items you had mentioned is the, data warehouse information. We need information yesterday to figure out where we are, where we're going. You brought up about liability date. If I don't have reliability of running data, I don't know where we stand. So it's very hard for us to plan and know where we're going moving forward. I'm just concerned come March and our cash closeout that we're going to be struggling trying to get to where we need to be. And then you had also mentioned that, moving forward, adding additional modules. Can you talk a little bit about, do you plan on adding new modules before making modules to existing modules that are needed, or how you're going to balance as to what happens first? Because there's a lot of things that we'd like to see fixed. Are you going to do those before you add new modules, or how's that decision going to be made?
So the last question is exactly the kind of question that Greg would have been here to answer. So I'll get to that question last, the best that I can, without committing SFS to something we can't do. The first thing about the system as far as response times, we are monitoring that. So if you feel that you're experiencing an unnecessary slowness or lack of responsiveness from the system, we definitely need to be made aware of that, and we need to be doing some monitoring of that for you, because as of this point, when I came today, I wasn't aware of any open issues that we were troubleshooting related specifically to response times. We have had our challenges in providing information on reports before the system times out, and we are trying to remedy that. Ideally, we'd like to get every report to come back within 15 minutes, but some of the challenges with the reports come from the liability date. So unfortunately, a lot of roads lead back to liability date, so maybe we need to talk about that a little bit more. There was a decision that was made probably 3 years ago where agencies had a requirement for liability date, and there wasn't a delivered field in PeopleSoft that was called liability date. So there was a lot of analysis done, and a recommendation was put forward to use the accounting date field on each of the modules because it's consistently there across all modules, and we would use liability date in the accounting date field in lieu of having a liability date field to put the liability date in. At the time that that decision was made, there was not a very clear understanding of the impact specifically related to KK or commitment control or budget. So I would suggest that SFS became abundantly aware of that as we started to run budget reports at the end of April and then in May, because the data was changing. So with expenditure data is created in SFS because of budget checking. That's similar to CAS, but it's also a little bit different than CAS in that when you checked your budget for something, you anticipated that it was approved and it was a valid transaction and it was about to be paid. That concept is much different because budget checking happens at different parts of the approval process in the different modules. So it's not a one-size-fits-all in SFS. So your expenditure data is reduced when you budget check. Well, how budget checking works is it looks to that accounting date. And in SFS, accounting date is really when is the accounting entry being made. So by putting the liability date in, and in some agencies the liability date goes back 2 years. By putting the date in 2 years ago, you then run a report and says, show me everything that happened this month. Well, it looks to that accounting date and says, oh, this happened 2 years ago, so you don't want to see that. You only want to see something that has the date of this month. So that's been very challenging because the users are looking for everything they processed in the system in a month that affected their expenditure base. And because they're using liability date in the accounting date field, that is not an easy piece of data to get to. And as soon as something budget checks 2 hours after you run that report, you're then seeing a totally different number because if a liability date was entered since you ran your report that affected that same period you were looking at, your number then changed. And you wouldn't have expected that result because in CAS, again, as the one diagram showed, there was a definitive stop. So you knew that that was the expenditures that you did for that day or that month. And in SFS, that's not necessarily the case. So we are trying to remedy that, David, and that's what the workshops are aimed for. One of the solutions, or part of the solution, is once we determine what to do with that information, we will go back and we will system date the transactions from an accounting date perspective, so you'll see things in the correct period. So the overall plan includes some kind of data conversion so that you get to a true expenditure point. So at this point, we are taking and we're saving off month-end reports so you can clearly see at the end of the month what the reports were showing. So the year-to-date and the life-to-date information you can rely on. As far as the month-to-date, it's not that you can't rely on it, but it doesn't represent the data you would expect it to. So it is representing the data that's in the system, but it doesn't have the same definition you would expect. As far as the other modules, as with any project, it takes a small army to lift off the implementation of a module. There's configuration, potentially there's customization, there's requirements gathering, there's the entire SDLC process. So for me to sit here and say SFS would finish all of the implementation that we're working on and then start to implement a module, the timeline wouldn't make sense. So I think that there will be work that will get started on evaluating the requirements for modules while we're trying to stabilize the system. As far as the actual turning on of the module, you won't see that tomorrow, next week, next month. That'll be a work in progress, and there'll be a lot of communication from SFS on that. So as far as the specific stake in the ground, one of the things SFS is trying to do now is to look at the resources that are still available, look at the consultant timeline when they're rolling off, and determine what work is work that SFS can commit to doing in a reasonable time frame. Because it is a concern that we stabilize the system. It's also a concern that we deliver the rest of the functionality to retire the legacy systems that the agencies are still hanging on to. So I don't know if Greg would have had a better answer for that, but hopefully I didn't overcommit us to something he would be disappointed in. Any other questions?
Just one last question. Perhaps it's just a statement you can maybe update us on. With the system, we understand that there's still not a clear policy on the utilization of credit cards by state agencies, intrastate agency purchases. We were informed that by SFS staff that we should advise all state agencies to not, and we were told to not accept credit card purchases. We went to OSC, and OSC said, well, no, I don't know who's telling you that. That's not true, but we need that policy, we think, and we'll need to flesh that out, because the purpose of having the SFS system in place was to be able to track all of those financials and in real time and credit cards were outside of that box, if you will. So I'm just curious as to whether or not there have been some discussions about that. Is there a policy that's coming out from OSC or from SFS on what the status will be for credit cards? And I would just add that many of the state agencies that correctional industry does business with, they utilize their credit cards for those smaller purchases, and in order to expedite and move things along quickly, they have an immediate need for a product or a service.
So that's a two-sided question. One, SFS doesn't make policy. They typically pass along others' policies. So
Recommendation for a policy to OSC from SFS.
because I can tell you what the system will allow you to do, and for transactions between agencies, there's the interagency billing process. That was a customization that was put in so that when you're doing business with another agency, you create the bill in SFS and they get a voucher. So you don't actually have to process the credit card, you're not paying any additional fees for that transaction and so on. As far as the policy of whether you should or shouldn't accept that, that would have to come from OSC, and I'll have to take that back to get you clarification on that. But as of right now, the system will allow you to create a bill for that agency, and then they pay that through a voucher that's automatically linked to that bill. So there wouldn't be a need for you to process a credit card transaction and go through a third party to get payment for that transaction. It happens automatically for you when you do the bill.
I think the challenge is, Allison, is that the agencies are not aware of this.
I think they're aware of it. I think they're pulling the wool over your eyes a little bit.
I can only tell you from our perspective, when we talk to them, you may have a different perspective, but when the agencies contact us, who are in SFS, they're not aware that there is another process that's as fast and as efficient as utilizing a credit card.
Okay.
So
That
my
is a good topic
response
potentially.
back to SFS, well, you need to tell, the agencies what your policy is or what the process is. Our organization cannot be the credit card police for the state of New York for all those transactions that come in, and unless there's an official statement that goes out, we even suggested that SFS at least do the broadcast bulletins that you send out and make everyone aware of the processes that can be utilized and no one would do that. So they said, no, we have to go back and figure this out and figure out where the policy is going to be. We contacted OSC and said, what's the policy? And they said, well, we don't have a policy and no one's asked us to create one. That sounds like a good idea. We'll get back to you. So we had to then go back and default to accepting credit cards because we couldn't get any support from SFS or OSC on a decision-making.
So I'll definitely take that back, and then once there is a decision, or at least from a discussion perspective, we could add that to any one of our daily call agendas, and we could put the communication of what that policy is out for you. So if nothing else, we can at least add it to the agenda for discussion.
Right, and I know we have Charlotte obviously here from OSC and some other folks. Allison's correct. Policies related to the statewide financial system typically emanate out of the state controller or division of budget. So I think this is one where maybe just folks didn't realize they needed to do this. To Allison's point, though, the system would be much more efficient and less costly to agencies to avoid a credit card process, which involves fees, and generate what, in essence, have them enable functionality the system anticipated and was actually a customization built to handle that exact issue. So.
Jeremy would like to make a brief announcement for the open discussion.
Oh, okay, sure. Any other questions for Allison? And we'll move on to, go ahead.
Related to the correction problem or situation, I think part of the challenge might be is that in SFS, the inability to link a purchase order with a bill that's created by corrections. So that might be the reason why agencies are using their credit card, because they can link a credit card to a PO, where if you issue a bill, you can't link that bill from corrections to that PO. So that might be a reason why agencies might be doing that.
It's not 100% correct.
You can link a PO to a corrections invoice. Help them.
I'll add that to our next agency agenda.
That's not the guidance we're getting.
And I'll shut up, I promise. But, you know, I think all of these things can be overcome and can corrected. I just don't think that there's a good path of communication. You know, you're finding out for the first time. Perhaps Mr. Zink doesn't even know about it. When we're in the trenches and dealing with these problems, I just don't get the feeling that these issues are being escalated up for resolution, quite frankly.
I think one of the tools that you guys used to utilize before is you used to have key stakeholder meetings periodically to have agencies attend. That kind of went away, and I think that would be something that would be helpful.
So we did have key stakeholder meetings, but when we had the key stakeholder meetings, we also weren't having the daily agency calls and we weren't having the user groups. So we're trying to balance, David, the feedback from the agencies that says we're having too many meetings and then we're not hitting the right target audience. So I think that I'll take that back and I'll bring that to our communication team. I think it's a difficult thing to balance because every person views their need for information differently. So we have advisories, we have the bulletins, we have calls, we have the weekly call, we have the enterprise connection. So there is a tremendous amount of information that's being sent out from SFS and sent into SFS, exactly to your point, Michael. So I think that the stakeholder meeting was a once a month, sometimes twice a month event where we were able to reach a broad audience. We're doing that in different ways now. So if you think that that's important, I can take that back and we can see.
I mean, the point you made is that there's a number of meetings that, you know, people are attending, and I'm trying to have staff attend as many as they can, but I still need to get the day-to-day stuff done, and I can't have, you know, the key stakeholders seem to be at a higher level than the day-to-day user using the system, more of a policy, more of an overview kind of a thing. So that's what I think is being lost, because I don't have the time to sit on 3 or 4 different calls to maybe you guys talk about something that I might be interested in.
I'll take that recommendation back.
Well, I think that's helpful feedback. Again, any system of the size and complexity of the statewide financial system is going to have growing pains as it moves towards implementation. I do agree with Michael that open communications very important as we move through this process. I know that the governance board that sits over SFS is committed to stabilization as really the key priority for the next fiscal year. So I think this input's been helpful. And Allison, thank you for the presentation.
Thank you very much.
We had a couple of things to cover before we open it up for new business. One is the OGS, as part of its enterprise initiatives, was asked to move forward with creation of a statewide business services center. The BSC goes live today for 22 agencies, and I would dare say that BSC would not have been possible without the creation of SFS. That's really the platform that will allow the BSC to do on behalf of its agencies the transactional finance and HR work that we're doing for a number of agencies who are either smaller or have some particular need, either through staffing or complexity of the transactions, to have that kind of assistance. The vision for the Business Service Center is obviously to move more and more of these kind of routine finance and HR transactions into a centralized place to provide that back office administrative support to agencies that need it. So we were excited to get that up and running. Obviously, we'll have more agencies coming in over the next 2 fiscal years. So we appreciate, obviously, the help for all of the agencies that's worked with us to get this stood up and running. Similar to what we did with SFS, might be a good topic for a future Procurement Council meeting to kind of check on the status of that. Again, we're very anxious to be a very customer service driven organization, and it does in part involve purchasing activities on behalf of agencies. The other thing I wanted to mention is the governor's office is having the annual New York State MWBE Forum next month here in the Empire State Plaza, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, October 25th, 26th, and 27th. My understanding is that there will be a lot more information going out to state agencies or authorized users, as well as MWB and small business vendors in the weeks ahead. We obviously invite all of you to attend part of that session. And I think on behalf of our Chief Diversity Officer, we've got a little more information on that.
My name is Jeremy Addy. I'm a senior policy analyst in the executive chamber. Our New York State's Chief Diversity Officer, Urtia Dinsey-Flores, had a last-minute conflict. She apologizes for not being able to make it. She's going to try to make the tail end of this session. She asked me to make the same announcement Mr. Traylor just made, that from October 25th to 27th is the MWBE Forum. The registration fee has decreased from last year. Last year it was $375. This year it is just $75. So we're really hoping for a large turnout. I have some flyers here, which I'm going to leave up at this table. I hope that many of you come and get it. And there's a website and a telephone number that you can use to get more information. And I hope to see many of you there.
Thank you. We'll now open up the floor to the membership for any new business.
Last meeting, I had asked about the implementation of the HBITS contract and where that stands. We're getting a little bit nervous that a lot of our contracts have been extended through the end of December, and I didn't know if there's any update or what we can expect or what we should be doing moving forward.
Sure. That contract is at the State Controller's Office, and actually Charlotte and I have been working very closely to move through issues that have need to be worked on for approval. It's certainly our expectation is that we will have a contract, or actually a series of contracts in place shortly, but obviously that's still a live procurement, so I can't go into too many of the details surrounding that. We did communicate some information to the agency and cluster CIOs last week about the process that we're already working on internally in OGS to stand up the managed services group. So we have a team in place now that will be managing the individual task orders from agencies that would come in for individuals that would need to be hired under those contracts. We're building an online portal for agencies to be able to utilize to manage the workflow in that process. Again, we want it to be fairly fast and paperless to the extent we can make it so we're very busy working on all of those internal business processes. Our expectation, assuming contracts are approved over the next couple of weeks, is that we will roll out some training for agency IT staff and finance staff with respect to actually the utilization of the contract and also the billing. Under those contracts, the structure of the contract allows OGS to handle the billing centrally for agencies and then basically bill back for your share of that vendor time under a particular task order. So that relieves that administrative burden on agencies. It allows us to bill centrally with the vendors, which was something that they were certainly seeking under a new contract structure. So we've got some, I think, innovative features of this contract that relieve that administrative burden for agencies and hopefully dramatically shorten the cycle time to actually hire an IT consultant in the various categories that are in the contract for IT services. I don't think I can really say much more than that. Charles, I don't know. You want to comment anything? Okay. Ron?
Yes, I just wanted to say that last week NYSED celebrated at its annual meeting employment successes through the Preferred Source program, and I know that that program is an important responsibility of the Procurement Council, and one of the things that we haven't done, we share a lot of the contract information, and obviously we're looking at the guidelines, but we really haven't shared a lot of the successes with this group in the past, which is shame on us. So if I may, I have our Joslin Awards program, which recognizes 59 individuals that work on preferred source contracts throughout the state at our various members. for their success in employment. If I could, I'd just like to pass them out to the council.
Great, thank you, Ron. No, I know Ann Sampson represented OGS at your annual meeting and said it was a great event. Obviously, that's the statutory purpose behind preferred sources is to, find meaningful employment for individuals, and it's great to actually be able to see some of those success stories. Yes.
I just have a question regarding the purchasing forum. We didn't occur this spring, but there was discussion it might occur next year, and I just wondered if there was any information that could be shared.
We're certainly working on a tentative agenda that we at some point will share. The commissioner is very interested in reinvigorating the annual purchasing forum for 2013. 2012 was a big transition year for us, as you know. So the decision was really made to postpone that for the current year. But we are looking at both resources and topics to see what the shape of a 2013 forum would look like. We obviously have to put that together and talk to the commissioner about that. But I think we're very hopeful that we will have a purchasing forum in 2013, probably in that same May time frame as traditionally been held. But so stay tuned. I think we'll have more information soon about what that might look like. Okay, I don't see any more hands being raised, so I think I'll bring the meeting to a close. I did want to note that our next meeting is tentatively scheduled for November 14th, 2012. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? All in favor? Aye. Thank you very much for coming.